Stubborn heart. In the Bible, a stubborn heart, often described as a hard or stiff-necked heart, refers to a willful resistance to God's guidance, warnings, and commandments. It is characterized by pride, self-reliance, and an unwillingness to repent or admit wrongdoing, leading people to follow their own desires rather than God's will. Several biblical examples illustrate the consequences of a stubborn heart ignoring God's warnings. Pharaoh, Exodus 7-12. This is one of the most prominent examples. Despite witnessing 10 escalating plagues sent by God, each preceded by a clear warning from Moses and Aaron, Pharaoh repeatedly hardened his heart and refused to let the Israelites go from slavery. His stubbornness led to the devastation of Egypt, the death of all the firstborn in the land, and the destruction of his army in the Red Sea. The Israelites in the wilderness, Numbers 14, Hebrews chapter 3, verse 7-11. After the Exodus, the Israelites frequently grumbled and rebelled against God, despite having seen his power and miracles. When they were at the border of the promised land, they refused to enter out of fear and a lack of faith, ignoring God's command and the advice of faithful spies. As a result of their stubborn and unrepentant hearts, God made that entire generation wander in the wilderness for 40 years until they died, unable to enter the promised rest. King Saul, 1 Samuel 13:15. God commanded Saul to utterly destroy the Amalekites and all their possessions as a judgment on their past sins. However, Saul only partially obeyed, sparing King Agag and the best livestock, claiming they were for sacrifices. The prophet Samuel rebuked him, stating to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22-23. His disobedient and rebellious heart, God rejected Saul as king. The people of Israel, Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 37. Jeremiah warned the Israelites for over 20 years about the coming destruction due to their idolatry and refusal to repent. They ignored his calls and continued in their stubborn ways, leading to the Babylonian exile. Jonah, Book of Jonah. God commanded Jonah to go to Nineveh and warn his people to repent. Instead, Jonah fled in the opposite direction, demonstrating a stubborn heart. Eventually, after being swallowed by a great fish, Jonah complied. But his initial refusal showed the consequences of resisting God's calling. The unforgiving servant. Matthew 18, verses 21-35. In this parable, a servant who was forgiven a large debt refused to forgive a smaller debt owed to him. His stubborn heart led to him facing severe consequences from the king, symbolizing the importance of humility and obedience to God's commands on forgiveness. King Jehoiakim, Jeremiah 36. The prophet Jeremiah dictated God's words of warning about the impending Babylonian invasion onto a scroll. When the scroll was read to King Jehoiakim, he defiantly cut it into pieces with a scribe's knife and burned it in the fire, explicitly ignoring God's message and the pleas of his officials. His stubborn refusal to heed the warning resulted in God bringing disaster upon him and his household. Jeremiah chapter 36, verse 3031. In each case, the stubbornness manifested as a refusal to listen to God's messengers and a preference for one's own counsel or desires, ultimately leading to severe consequences. Conclusion. These examples illustrate that ignoring God's warnings often leads to dire consequences. A stubborn heart not only resists divine guidance, but also brings about ruin, emphasizing the need for humility and obedience in the face of God's commands.